Hi, good day, class. I hope everyone is well. Let's pick back up from where we left off. So, just to recap, we spoke about what is an ecosystem yesterday. We established that it is a community or a group of living organisms that live and interact with each other in a specific environment. And we looked at different ecosystems together. We also spoke about ecosystems being made up of two main components. We spoke about the first component being abiotic factors, and we said that abiotic factors are any non-living conditions that influence an ecosystem. We also spoke about biotic factors that are living components, such as birds and bacteria and plants and so on, that actually affect the ecosystem. We spoke about predator and prey relationships. We said that a predator is an organism that kills and feeds off of another organism. We said that a prey is an organism that the predator eats. So in this case, on the left-hand side, sorry, the right-hand side here, you have the bear that is the predator and the fish that is the prey. So we went through some examples of that already last class. We spoke about the energy flow in the system, an ecosystem, and we spoke about the 10% rule. We learned how to read a food chain, and we actually practiced making some food chains. We spoke about the different levels of a food chain. We spoke about the producer, the primary consumer, the secondary consumer, and the tertiary consumer. Right, so we did some practice. We also spoke about a food web, and we also established that a food web consists of many food chains in a single ecosystem. So we spoke about the energy and the levels of energy moving from the producers to the consumers. We also did this little worksheet together. We spoke about herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores. You guys listed some examples for me, and we looked at this really lovely video here. Okay, so we left off at symbiotic relationships. So symbiotic relationships, we're going to look at three symbiotic relationships. So firstly, let's look at mutualism. So mutualism is where two organisms are in a relationship and they both benefit. So let's take a look at this example on the right-hand side here with the bees and the flowers. So what happens is that bees actually collect nectar to make honey from traveling from one flower to another flower. And by doing so, they actually carry pollen from one plant to the other, which results in pollination. So both the bee and the flower are actually benefiting in this relationship. Let's look at the next relationship, which is commensalism. Now, commensalism, it's where one species benefits and the other is unharmed. So, for example, this cow here. So, what happens? We know that cows are not very clean animals, so they attract a lot of flies, and obviously the flies are quite, bothersome to the cow. So to get the flies away, the cow actually moves its tail to try swat the flies away. So by doing so, it sort of chases the flies away from the cow. And when the flies are chased away from the cow by the cow swaying its tail, the egret, this little bird here, actually swoops down and eats the flies. So in this case, the egret is actually being benefited and the cattle is just unharmed. Now let's talk about parasitism. Now, parasitism is where one species benefits and the other is harmed or dies. So let's look at this example of a mosquito. We know that mosquitoes are a real pest. So when mosquitoes actually feed on human blood, they're actually gaining nutrients for their eggs. But at the same time, when they inject us with their saliva, it causes a reaction with our body and it causes us to be very uncomfortable because it starts to itch. So let's look at this video of symbiotic relationships.
Math and science. In this video, I'd like to talk about symbiotic relationships. Symbiotic relationship is a close, long-term relationship between two different species. I'd like to talk about three types: mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. With mutualism, both organisms benefit from the relationship, so it's a thumbs up for both. With commensalism, one organism benefits, and the other organism is neither helped nor harmed, kind of like neutral. In parasitic relationships, one organism benefits while the other organism is harmed.
Some organisms live in very close symbiotic relationships with each other, which means one or both rely on the other for their survival. One type of symbiosis is called commensalism, in which one organism benefits and the other isn't harmed or helped. This owl limpet is being used by the tiny buckshot barnacles as a substrate on which to grow. As the owl limpet moves over the rock, the barnacles are carried through the water column, giving them greater access to food. Barnacles get their food by filtering it out of the water. They remain fixed in location and so are depending on the abundance of planktonic organisms living in the water around them. Another example of commensalism is shown in this picture here. This small amphipod is living attached to the outside of a sponge. Sponges filter huge quantities of water through their pores every day. This amphipod sits outside one of those holes and feeds itself off the organisms in the currents. Mutualism is a form of symbiosis in which both organisms benefit. An example is shown here with anemone and clownfish. Stinging cells in the anemones can scare off the predators of the clownfish. The clownfish has developed an immunity to the toxins in the stinging cells, and they hide in the anemone. But they also can aggressively attack and scare off the anemone's main predators, sea stars and sea snails. So both benefit. Another example of mutualism happens inside this sunburst anemone on the Pacific coast. Its green color comes from tiny photosynthesizing algae that live within it and get their nutrients from the waste of the anemone. The anemone, in turn, feeds off the garden of algae as needed to supplement its own food source.
Found in clearings and forest gaps in tropical rainforests. In these regions of high competition amongst plants and animal species for survival, much of this tree's success has been attributed to a special mutualism. Cecropia trees provide a safe, climate-controlled shelter for housing a fierce ant genus known as Azteca. In addition, these trees supply nutrients to their ant colonies through tiny growths called Mullerian food bodies, which are harvested by the ants. These serve no reproductive purpose for the plant, but are produced exclusively for the nourishment of the Azteca colonies. In return for food and shelter, the ants act as the plant's nervous and defense systems. Invasive, destructive elements, such as herbivores and leafcutter ants, are quickly swarmed, immobilized, and removed from the tree. The ants even help the Cecropia tree ward off competitive.
There are three types of organisms I'd like to look at that have parasitic relationships. The first is protozoa, the second are arthropods, and the third is helminths. Protozoa are single-cell organisms that are found in moist areas. Many of them are parasites, like the plasmodium that causes malaria, a worldwide disease. They live in moist areas, they infect the water, other animals and humans drink the water, and then they become infected. An amoeba is a single-cell protozoa, and they are sometimes in the news because some of them can be brain-eating and result in death, but most just give you an upset stomach. But they are also parasites. The next type of parasite are helminths, or worms. There are several types of these. You have a roundworm, a fluke, or even a tapeworm. The reason why these can be a problem is that Many of these worms, such as a roundworm or a tapeworm, will live inside the intestine of an animal. The animal uses the restroom. This feces goes into the water. Another animal drinks the water, like us, and then this parasite starts living inside of their stomach. Next, you have arthropods that are parasites like this tick that can cause Lyme disease, or a flea that can cause all kinds of problems with their host, and then the mosquito, who is responsible for many diseases worldwide. In each of these arthropods, like the mosquito, the arthropod benefits, maybe gets food from the host, and the host suffers. The mosquito is responsible for the Zika virus and even West Nile virus, along with many others. In each of these types of parasites, the parasite benefits and the host is harmed. Thanks for watching about symbiotic relationships and Moo Math.
So that was a fun little video on symbiotic relationships. So let's get back to the PowerPoint now. Right. So talk about other interrelationships, such as camouflage. So some organisms actually resemble others or their surroundings so that they can be concealed. So I'm going to show you a little video on camouflage.
We're here in Indonesia for this class, underwater survival. Example 1. A type of anglerfish called a frogfish. You think you're looking at a yellowish sea sponge, and you are. But if you look very closely, you'll see a frogfish sitting there. That's what a frogfish does. Sits there. So bigger fish get used to it and leave it alone. Example 2. The ghost pipefish. These guys have evolved to mimic something no self-respecting predator would be caught dead eating. Seagrass? Hence, these ghost pipefish are free to drift wherever the tide takes them. Example 3, the leaf scorpion fish. A similar strategy to the ghost pipefish. The leaf scorpion fish has evolved itself to look like a leaf on the sand. Example 4, the cockatoo wasp fish. A final example of this scheme. Not only has the cockatoo wasp fish evolved to look like a dead leaf, it's learned to rock back and forth like a leaf would. So, what's the takeaway from today's class? To stay alive down here, morphing into a plant shape might be the way to go. Would this work for humans? Probably not.
Okay, awesome. So we just looked at a video on camouflage. So even in this picture here, you would think that this object here in the middle is a stone, but really it's a fish. Okay, so let's look at the other slides. Right. So also another interrelationship is protection. So some organisms actually use others for protection. For example, the grasshopper actually live in long pieces of grass for protection against any sorts of predators. You also have support. So some organisms would actually use other organisms um, for support. So for example, birds that build their nests in trees. So let's talk about marine ecosystems. So marine ecosystems are aquatic environments that have very high levels of salt. So whenever you go into the ocean, you taste salt because there's high levels of dissolved salt within the ocean. So marine ecosystems, they include open ocean, sea ocean, and coastal marine ecosystems. Each has a different physical and biological characteristic. So let's take a look at this video.
Good day, learners. This is Easy Engineering. For today's topic, we're going to talk about the marine ecosystem. Have you ever dreamed about traveling inside a submarine? Diving from the sea level to the deep ocean where you could no longer see the shine of the sun and you could only see what lies below. What do you think exists there? Let's dive in and find out. There is a system in the ocean where plants and animals live harmonically in a place, and that is called the marine ecosystems. The marine ecosystem, or the ocean, is an area of salty water that covers most of the Earth's surface, and there are millions of different plants and animals living inside. There are five oceans around the world: the Arctic, Atlantic, Indian, Pacific, and Southern Oceans. Fun fact, learners, did you know that the Mariana Trench is the deepest part of the ocean? In fact, it is equivalent to how tall the Mount Everest is. Now, there are small organisms and bacteria found in the ocean, seas, bays, and inlets that make up part of the creatures that live in the marine ecosystem. There are three main layers of the ocean based on how deep it is. First is the euphotic or the surface zone. In this zone, sunlight can penetrate or can be seen throughout, and the water is warm. Most plants and animals live here. Second is the despotic or the twilight zone. This zone gets some sunlight but not enough for plants to survive. And the third zone is the apotic zone, where there is no sunlight at all, the darkest side of the ocean where unknown creatures could be lurking. Plants serve a very important purpose in the life of animals, but did you know that plants can also grow underwater? Some examples of marine plants are the seaweeds, marine algae, and sea grasses. On the other hand, mangrove trees, which live on tropical shores, are also part of the ocean ecosystem. These plants absorb carbon dioxide. In exchange, they give up oxygen for animals to breathe in. Marine plants live in the top or euphotic zone of the ocean because they need sunlight to create food through photosynthesis. Kelp is a famous type of algae and it provides food and shelter to ocean animals. Did you know that it is even used by humans in things like ice cream and toothpaste?
Phytoplankton are tiny plants in the ocean that serve as the food for many ocean creatures, like smallest fish and even the largest of whales. Speaking of animals, what animals found in the marine ecosystem? I'm sure there are lots and lots of them that we couldn't even count since the ocean is vastly wide. The ocean consists of a large variety of animal life, including fish, mollusks, dolphins, seals, walruses, whales, crustaceans, bacteria, sea anemones, and many others. Fun fact learners, did you know that the largest animal in the sea is the blue whale? It averages up to 7.6 meters long at birth and weighs about 3 tons. As an adult, it can easily stretch to the length of a city bus and weigh close to 200 tons. Now back to the topic. Most marine animals stay in euphotic and dysphotic zones, where they have access to plants and other ocean animals to eat. But deep down below the layers, there is life too, and they might look weirdest animals on Earth. One example is the anglerfish. Fishes like this adapt to the darkest side of the ocean. In fact, the anglerfish creates its own light to lure their prey, and when it is close, the anglerfish just gobbles it up in a blink of an eye. We humans use the ocean a lot, whether it's for food, medicines, oil, other resources, or just for recreation like swimming and parties. Either way, we love the things that the ocean gives us. But the demand for resources from the ocean can be destructive to the marine ecosystems. Around the world, bad fishing practices like poisoning and using dynamite to catch fish also kills other animals like corals and small fishes. Overfishing popular species and endangered species are prohibited by law, but some people still do it. Pollution is also harming the marine ecosystem. Pollutants such as fertilizers and household products and even oil spills ruin the beauty of the ocean. For us, there are many simple things that you can do to help protect the ocean, like recycling and making sure that chemicals don't go down your household drains is an easy way to start. Don't throw your garbage into the ocean because fishes eat it and be poisoned with it. So, learners, now we've learned important things about the ocean. And that's it. That is all for now. I hope you learned something today. Once again, this is Easy Engineering.
Class, that was a fun little video on marine ecosystems. So let's talk about the three main layers of the ocean. So we have first this is above 200 meters, which is the euphotic sunlight zone. So this is where sunlight barely penetrates beyond this zone. You have the dysphotic zone. This is where sunlight decreases rapidly with depth. So photosynthesis is not here. It's not possible. So photosynthesis does not occur. And then you have the aphotic zone. So this is where there's no sunlight here. So the zone is just completely dark, right? It's completely dark here, right? So marine ecosystems. So large portions of the world's populations actually rely on marine ecosystems for food, employment, and other ecosystem services. So the stability of these ecosystems is seriously threatened by humans, a use of marine ecosystems and pollution of marine ecosystems. Unsustainable resource exploitation, such as overfishing of some species, marine pollution, climate change, and coastal development are all environmental issues that affect marine systems. Right? So in addition, the ocean also absorbs a large portion of carbon dioxide, which also leads to global warming. And in addition to that, ocean acidification is another process, which we'll go through just now, that changes the chemistry of the ocean. So really what I'm trying to say is that marine ecosystems are very important for humans. They provide us with many positives. However, humans also they also threaten marine life, and they also threaten marine ecosystems by things like dumping trash into the ocean, by using a lot of fossil fuels, sometimes like things like overfishing, things like that. It really affects the ocean, and by affecting the ocean, we are in turn affecting ourselves. So let's take a look at the next slide. Right. Right. So let's look at this particular marine ecosystem, the coral reef. Now, the coral reef is a very diverse ecosystem. It is made of many, many organisms and many, many creatures. So coral polyps, these are the animals that are actually in charge of creating the reefs, and we'll look at how they actually create the reefs in a second. So so the coral polyps can appear in like different variety of shapes and sizes, including massive reef building colonies, gracefully flowing fans, and even tiny lone organisms. So there are countless of varieties of corals. Some inhabit warm, shallow tropical waters, while others dwell in chilly, dark depths of the sea. So let's take a little look at this video here of coral reefs and how they are made. So let's just take a little look.
Coral reefs. Their bright, vivid colors can be seen in tropical ocean waters around the globe. Coral reefs. Their bright, vivid colors can be seen in tropical ocean waters around the globe. Beyond their brilliant appearance lies a hidden significance. Coral are animals. Though they may look like colorful plants, coral are in fact made up of tiny animals called polyps. These invertebrates can range from the size of a pinhead to a bit larger than a basketball. Each polyp consists of a soft sac-like body topped by a mouth covered in stinging tentacles. To protect their soft bodies and add support, the polyps secrete limestone skeletons or calicles. Corals are megabuilders. Polyp calicles connect to one another, creating a colony that acts as a single organism. As colonies grow over hundreds and thousands of years, they join with other colonies and become reefs that can grow to hundreds of miles long. The largest coral reef is Australia's Great Barrier Reef, which began growing about 20,000 years ago. Coral reefs are some of the most diverse ecosystems on Earth. Though they cover less than 1% of the ocean floor, coral reefs are home to 25% of all marine creatures. It's been estimated that up to 2 million species inhabit coral reefs, rivaling the biodiversity of the rainforest. The reefs provide rich habitat that helps protect young fish as they grow. Coral are translucent. Coral reefs get their rainbow of colors from algae or zooxanthellae that live in their tissue. Though corals use their tentacles to capture some food, most of their food comes from the algae they house. When coral becomes stressed by pollution or other factors, they evict their algae. Coral bleaching results, revealing corals' white skeletons. Coral provide a window to the past. As coral grow, their limestone skeletons form layers similar to tree rings that vary in composition and thickness based on ocean conditions at the time. With some coral reefs growing for thousands or even millions of years, scientists can study these layers to reveal what the Earth's climate may have been like in the ancient past. Unfortunately, climate change is putting coral's future in danger, along with the millions of species that inhabit the reefs and the 500 million people that rely on reef fish for food. Warming waters result in prolonged coral bleaching that kill coral reefs or leave them vulnerable to other threats. Without significant action on climate change, our oceans could lose many of their colorful reefs by the end of the century.
That was a fun little video. Now I want to play the next video. And how corals are made.
Let's look inside a polyp to see how it helps build a reef. It takes carbon from algae and seawater and turns it into calcium carbonate. When you breathe, you exhale carbon dioxide. All animals do, including corals. But their carbon dioxide combines with calcium from the ocean to create calcium carbonate. Corals use this chalky compound to build their skeletons. Hard coral polyps push away from the surface on which they reside, then fill the gaps with calcium carbonate. Repeating this process over and over, they construct an entire reef. Corals can build up a reef at a rate of several centimeters per year. Speeding up time allows us to watch the coral community grow, as individuals compete for resources on the reef. This slow, steady process can go on for a long time. Some reef structures are centuries old. Ocean currents and other factors can change the coral's shape. The same species can look quite different depending on something as simple as how fast the surrounding water is moving. We call this attribute plasticity. Corals' flexible response to their environment helps them adapt to a changing world.
So that was a video on how coral reefs are made. So let's continue with the lecture. So let me just explain this here. Right, so hard corals or reef-building corals are the species that actually make the corals. So what occurs is that the calcium carbonate that the hard corals produce actually provides a foundation for the baby corals to set upon. So it's really important that we take care of our corals, our coral reefs, right? So the structure of coral reefs is also influenced by different animals and plants. So the architecture of the coral reefs are actually it's actually contributed by a variety of algae, seaweed, sponges, sediments, and so on. So all of these act as starting points for new corals when organisms perish, right? So let's move on. So there are actually different types of coral reefs. So we have the barrier reef, we have the atolls, and we have the fringing reef. The barrier reef is a coral reef parallel to the shore, but it's separated by a channel of water. Atolls is a ringed shape, as seen in this picture here, consisting of a coral rim that encircles a lagoon, which is a body of water. And then you have the fringing reef. A fringing reef is a reef that forms around a landmass. So let's take a look at a video on the different types of corals. So you'll see the barrier reefs, the atolls, and the fringing.
Coral reefs. Coral reefs are ecosystems found in clear, shallow, tropical waters around the world. An ecosystem is an environment where plants and animals live and interact. Many types of marine animals and plants live in coral reefs. Coral reefs are among the world's oldest living ecosystems. Most of the coral reefs today were formed after the last ice age. The melting ice caused the sea levels to rise. The waters got high enough that they flooded the edges of some of our continents and islands and created these beautiful ecosystems near the beaches. Coral reefs are common in Hawaii and the Caribbean, and as well as other islands. The wide variety of plant life and creatures in coral reefs make these islands popular places to visit. Coral are amazing and beautiful organisms. Did you know that coral can be white, red, pink, green, blue, orange, or purple? And did you also know that coral is actually an animal? Coral is a living organism related to jellyfish. Tiny individual animals called coral polyps make up coral reefs. These small animals have soft, tube-shaped bodies and a ring of tentacles surrounding their mouths. They also have hard exoskeletons, which are outer covering that support the coral polyps. Unlike plants, coral does not make its own food. It eats small animals and plants called plankton and algae. Microscopic algae that lives in the tissues of coral polyps helps it to survive. Coral reefs are formed by a single coral polyp, which attaches itself to a rock or seabed. The coral polyp then builds an exoskeleton of limestone to protect itself. Eventually, these structures turn into huge reefs that form over thousands of years. The reefs built by coral polyps are usually found at depths of less than 150 feet, where the temperature is warmer. The water at these depths is usually clear, which allows the sunlight to move through it better. The reefs need calcium to grow, which is found in the warmer, shallow waters. Reefs also develop in areas where there is plenty of wave action. The waves bring in food, nutrients, and oxygen to the coral reef. The waves also wash away a residue from the coral. Coral reefs vary in shape, size, and color. Let's take a look at a few different types of reefs. Fringing reefs are the most common type of reef. They grow close to the shorelines of continents and islands. Fringing reefs can be attached to the shore or be separated from it by a narrow strip of water called a lagoon. The Ningalo Reef is the biggest fringing reef in the world. It is located on the coast of Australia and is over 160 miles long. Barrier reefs are farther offshore and can be several miles from the shorelines of continents and islands. Unlike fringing reefs, barrier reefs have some deeper portions. The largest reef in the world is the Great Barrier Reef found in Australia. It is more than 1,600 miles long. That's 10 times the length of the Ningalo Reef. The Great Barrier Reef is so large, it can be seen from space. Atolls are rings of coral that encircle a body of water called a lagoon. They are found in the tropics and subtropics, which are warmer areas near the equator. Atolls usually begin as a fringe reef surrounding a volcanic island. As the coral expands and grows, the island sinks into the ocean, leaving the ring of coral. Some atolls, like the Marshall Islands, are so big people live on them. Other types of coral reefs include apron reefs. These reefs look like a fringing reef but are more sloped. Patch reefs are circular reefs that grow in between a fringe reef and a barrier reef. These reefs grow in water that is only about 10 to 20 feet deep. Ribbon reefs are long, narrow, winding reefs. Some ribbon reefs form the outer edges of the Great Barrier Reef. Each type of reef is an ecosystem. Various kinds of plants and animals inhabit coral reefs. Every coral reef eventually develops different zones. The 3 different zones are occupied by several kinds of corals, fish, plants, and ocean life depending on the location in the world. The shore or inner reef zone is found between the highest point of the reef and the shoreline. Depending on the shape of the reef, this area is full of life that includes fish, starfish, sea cucumbers, and anemones. The crest reef zone is the highest point of a reef, where waves break over it. The fore or outer reef zone is where the reef wall falls, and the waters get calmer. This zone is around 30 feet deep. It is the most populated part of the reef, with a variety of coral species. Even though coral reefs only make up about 1% of the ocean floor, they make up 25% of life in the ocean. Animals use the coral reefs as stopping points as they travel from place to place, kind of like hotels for sea creatures. Sea urchins, worms, sea stars, sponges, sharks, rays, lobster, octopus, and snails are a few of the abundant animals that live together among the coral. This is a word that describes how these animals live together. The word is symbiosis. Symbiosis means that the organisms rely on each other for their survival. One example of symbiosis is the anemone fish and the sea anemone. The sea anemone's tentacles provide protection for the fish and its eggs. In return, the fish protects the anemone from predators. Plants are also found in the coral reefs. Plant plankton called phytoplankton, algae, and other plants convert the light from the sun into energy to make its food. Algae and sea grasses are the main types of plants in the coral reef ecosystem. The plants provide food and oxygen to the animals that live on the coral reef. One of the most important plants in the reef are sea grasses. They provide shelter for young reef animals like conch and lobster. Coral reefs are much more important to Earth than many people realize. They protect the coastline from erosion, storms, floods, and damage caused by strong waves. Coral reefs are also important to people who have jobs as fishermen or to the tourist industry. Medical discoveries, such as medicines for cancer and arthritis, have also come from coral reefs. But even more importantly, Reefs help remove and recycle carbon dioxide from the air, which contributes to global warming. Unfortunately, coral reefs are being destroyed faster than they can grow. Much of the damage is done by overfishing, pollution, and global warming. Coral bleaching is one of the problems global warming creates. It occurs when the temperature of the water becomes too warm or too cold. When this happens, corals release the algae that is living in their tissues. This causes the coral to turn white. The coral then becomes stressed and could die if the water temperatures don't return to normal. Tourism often leads to reef damage because visitors stand on them, touch them, or bump into them with their boats. Some scientists believe the Great Barrier Reef will not even be around in less than 30 years. If our reefs die, that also means that many plants and animals will die as well. Coral reefs are important ecosystems found all over the world. Coral reefs provide the habitat for many different types of marine animals and plants. Just like all ecosystems, coral reefs need to be protected. They are important to the survival of planet Earth. Thanks for following Clarendon Learning. Be sure to...
So that was the video on the types of reefs. So let's continue. So you have different organisms that live in coral reefs. You have like whale sharks, you have sea turtles, you have manta rays. All right, so let's take a look at these videos. This was an error. This video, and I want you to list from the video 5 organisms that live in a coral reef. Oh, just to note, the animals that I listed in the PowerPoint, you're not allowed to list those animals. You have to find animals within the video to list, right?
Here, near Devil's Point in the Philippines, we are immersed in one of Earth's most diverse ecosystems. A system that harnesses the power of the sun through a unique collaboration between animals and algae. A system that supports thousands of species by making efficient use of often scarce nutrients. Hidden in these nooks and crannies, we find a multitude of organisms in a complex web of connections. Here, a moray eel gets a little help from its friends. A dental exam from cleaner shrimp and cleaner wrasfish. They eat small parasites that can make the eel sick. A win-win mutualistic relationship. Not all interactions are beneficial. A crown of thorns starfish devours coral, leaving bare white skeletons in its wake. A tiny trapezia crab successfully defends its coral home from the much bigger creature. And a brightly colored nudibranch dines on sponges growing on the reef. Its colors warn predators to stay away. Chemicals ingested by the nudibranch make it poisonous. We observe these species and many more, but what we can't see are all the relationships that link them to one another. Most importantly, they take part in a food web, overlapping connections of producers and consumers, predators and prey. Humans take part in this food web too, and coral reefs support more complex food webs than any other places on the planet.
Okay, awesome. So those were examples of animals that live in the coral reef. So I'd like you to take the time to actually think and write down 5 organisms that you saw in that video. So let's continue. Great. So let's take a look at this food web. Right. So just wanted to show you this food web. So you have suspended organic material, the coral reef, right? The sea slug, shark, octopus, parrotfish. So we did food webs earlier. So I just wanted to show you an example of this coral reef food web, right? So ocean acidification. Let's talk about ocean acidification. So ocean acidification is a global threat to the world's ocean, estuaries, and waterways. It is actually often called climate change's evil twin. So it's projected to grow as carbon dioxide actually continues to be emitted into the atmosphere. So oceanic acidification is an ongoing decrease in the pH value of Earth's oceans. So it causes, it's caused by the uptake of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So the main cause of ocean acidification is the burning of fossil fuels. So how can we help to stop ocean acidification? So the way that we can stop or limit ocean acidification is actually to reduce the amount of fossil fuels that we use. So if we dramatically cut our global warming emissions, we can significantly reduce the harm in marine ecosystems. So let's take a look at this little video on ocean acidification.
In Antarctica, few animals can survive the howling winds and frigid temperatures up on the land blanketed by snow. But here in the Southern Ocean, under the serene, cool blue ice cover, Antarctica is teeming with life. In these frigid waters live creatures that would feel right at home in a 1950s monster movie. Giant sea spiders, jellyfish, anemones, and sea urchins.
They're living in water that's so cold that you can't even put your hand in it for 5 seconds without feeling extraordinary pain. It's just like right above the freezing point of seawater. It's so cold.
Today, the ability of these animals to survive in sub-freezing waters is being tested by a new threat, ocean acidification.
The Antarctic and the Arctic are thought to be possibly some of the more vulnerable marine ecosystems to climate change. And they might be the first in time to really have acidic waters meet the organisms that live there.
What's making the oceans more acidic? Scientists blame the carbon dioxide created by the burning of fossil fuels. The CO2 goes into the atmosphere, but as much as 30% is then absorbed by the oceans. The more carbon dioxide, the higher the acidity. Initially, scientists welcomed this absorption of carbon dioxide by the oceans because they believed it would reduce CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere. But as the oceans take in carbon dioxide, now the question for scientists is how much is too much?
We knew that we were burning things to make energy, and that carbon dioxide, some of it was ending up in the oceans. And for many people, that was seen as a good thing. What we're recognizing is that there are changes in the composition in the oceans.
In the last 150 years, as CO2 has increased in the atmosphere, the pH of ocean surface waters has dropped by around 0.1 pH unit. That's a 26% increase in ocean acidity. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predicts an additional drop of 0.2 to 0.3 pH units by the end of the century. That's a 100 to 150% increase in ocean acidity since before the Industrial Revolution. As the ocean becomes more acidic, it makes it harder for marine animals that build their shells out of calcium carbonate, like corals and oysters. At the University of California, Santa Barbara, scientists are studying the effects of higher CO2 on sea urchins.
We mix the carbon dioxide into our seawater tanks to mimic future high CO2 oceans, levels that we thought we'd go to in 100 years or something. And we do start to see effects at those high numbers in terms of slowing down their growth. They are a little bit smaller at any time in development. And also there's some effects on fertilization, we think, when water gets really acidic.
Not far off the coast of UC Santa Barbara, ocean acidification could have a direct impact on people who make their living harvesting sea urchins.
My name's Bruce Steele. I'm a commercial sea urchin diver. I work at the Channel Islands, which are right here off the coast.
The boom for sea urchin sushi started with the Japanese back in the 1980s. Now the uni crop brings the state of California over $100 million a year and provides essential jobs to hundreds of divers and processors. But the changes to ocean chemistry have them worried.
The problems that we're seeing with animals like sea urchins or oysters are kind of a harbinger of problems that might be going on in the open ocean.
Two recent events clearly show that ocean acidification has already arrived on Western shores and could have a direct impact on the seafood we eat. In 2007, Science magazine reported that surface water in places along the California coast was already more acidic than researchers predicted. Around the same time, news reports started trickling in from oyster hatcheries in Oregon and Washington state. Millions of larvae were dying. The culprit, ocean acidification.
It seemed that it was actually the change in the chemistry of the seawater that was killing the larvae.
The massive die-off alarmed both the seafood industry and scientists. In California, they joined forces to do something about it. They're sharing data and standardizing water measurements to determine which species are most vulnerable.
There's a crew of us, the oystermen, the fishermen themselves, scientists, and other people in the community are getting together and kind of asking, how can we work together to address some of these growing economic issues?
Back in Antarctica, where scientists predict acidic conditions will be felt first, the options for Gretchen Hoffman's sea urchins are quickly dwindling.
It's kind of like a double-edged sword. They've learned to live in a really cold environment that stays cold all the time. And then here comes climate change. So the ocean's going to warm and the pH is going to change. And where are you going to go? Where can you migrate to that's colder if you're an Antarctic urchin? Well, nowhere, actually.
Since the beginning of planet Earth, animals have adapted to changing conditions. But adaptation can take thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years. Now, with millions of tons of carbon dioxide going into the oceans every day, can the creatures of the sea change quickly enough to survive in the changing oceans?
Okay. Awesome. Okay, thank you so much, class, for attending this marine ecosystems. There are many other marine ecosystems, but I can only focus on one today as the time is so short. But I hope you guys enjoyed the class today, and I will see you guys later for our microbiology class. So take care, everyone. Thank you so much again, and have a great day.